This presentation covers the ethnic heritage of Iowa from 10,000 BC to the 1870s, and from native Indians to the Euro-American settlers. The state of Iowa that we know today was originally part of the 1803 Louisiana Purchase and became part of the United States after the War of 1812. The territory moved from what was known as the Missouri Territory to a legal territorial government when others were added, such as Michigan and Wisconsin. In 1838, it became the Iowa Territory, along with the eastern half of North and South Dakota and Minnesota. Finally, in December of 1846, Iowa was granted statehood. By 1860, virtually all of the state was settled and farmed by Euro-Americans. Native Indians occupied and roamed the area of the present state of Iowa thousands of years before the first European explorers came. This includes the Stone Age, when native Indians lived in caves, to the Archaic period, when shelters began to be used, and stone weapons and tools. And in 1,000 years BC, woodland period showed farming as well as permanent homes, pottery, and we saw the burial mounds begin to appear. This is the great oasis-style home that began to be used from the 900 AD. Okay, and this is the Glenwood tribe home from that same period. Various techniques were used in the manufacture of pottery. On the left, we see paddling, and on the right, coiling. Oneota pottery appeared beginning in the 1200s through the 1700s. Burial mounds were found from the woodland period. Not all were used for burial of humans. Some were used to mark borders or ceremonial centers. Some held multiple bodies buried with trinkets or exotic trade items. In northeast Iowa, in Clayton and Allamakee counties, you will frequently find mounds in shapes of animals and called effigy mounds. Some were used for burial, but many were not. The woodland Indians grew gourds, squash, sunflowers, and tobacco, lamb's quarters, marsh elder, little barley, and erect knotweed. And late in the period, corn and maize was their primary diet. They hunted early on with spears and darts, and later with bow and arrow. In the 1000 AD period up through the 1600s, we see the impact of Native Americans on Iowa. In 1682, La Salle explored regions for France, and many tribes moved from the east due to the Indian Wars. In the 1700s, wars across Iowa involved numbers of nations from the Native Americans, and then in 1712 we had the first French Fox War. and the Second French Fox War occurred in 1728. It must have been absolutely beautiful on the upper Mississippi River, as we see depicted in this scene of a Sioux Indian village. In the 1800s, conflicts between white settlers, the government, and Native Indians pushed the Indians further west. Sometimes they were tricked into signing a treaty giving away tribal land, and white settlers began to move Native Americans to reservations in Minnesota, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Kansas. There was a Chief Black Hawk of the Fox Sauk tribe in a war with the United States government, and they were forced to cede their land. Chief Mahaska of the Iowa tribe was leading his people from 1784 to 1834. Chief Wapello was head of one of the three principal Fox villages. Chief Black Hawk led the Fox and Sauk nations from 1767 to 1838. In 1832, the Black Hawk Purchase Treaty was signed. Neutral ground existed from 1830 to 1846. Chief Keokuk led his tribe from 1767 through 1848. He was a rival of Black Hawk. Warrior dress was often very interesting, and here we see Chief Keokuk. The loss of land held by Native Americans continued, and in 1846, Potawatomi land in western Iowa was ceded. And in 1851, the Sioux Cession removed the last Native American Indian claim to land in Iowa. In 1862, the Homestead Act allowed the Great Plains to be settled. And note that it wasn't until 1969 that all Native Americans are finally declared U.S. citizens. Native Indian tribes stretched all across what we know today as the United States. Early homes of the Meskweki were made of bark. The story of the Meskweki is unique to both American history and Iowa Indian history. In 1846, the Meskweki and the Sauk were moved to Kansas, but a few secretly remained in Iowa. Those who moved to Kansas were unhappy with the poor conditions there, and in 1856 requested and received permission from the Iowa General Assembly to return to the state and purchase land in Tama County. When the Meskweki returned to live in Iowa, the federal government withdrew financial support promised in earlier treaties. Years of hardship followed as the tribe worked to make a living on an area of land too small to support so many people. Finally, state officials convinced the government to resume the annual payments. The tribe used the money to purchase more land. Today, the Musqueam own over 3,000 acres along the Iowa River in Tama County. They have worked diligently to support themselves. They've started home industries and become known for their wooden bowls and spoons, loom beadwork, pipes, and hand-woven yarn sashes.
Attending a powwow is a good way to learn about the culture of Iowa's native Indians. Shown here is the opening procession of an early Tama powwow. In this slide, you can see them dance in their native costumes. At the powwows, people could hear their music, buy native arts and crafts, and eat their foods. Their foods included fry bread with honey and Indian tacos. By 1848, the only Indians left in the state were the Sioux in northwestern Iowa. Anxious pioneers found themselves in danger from roving bands of Sioux who still considered northwestern Iowa part of their hunting ground. In 1854, a trader by the name of Henry Lott killed a Sioux by the name of Sintammaduta and his whole family. Lott's motive for the killing is not clear, but it did give the dead Indian's brother, Inkpaduta, a reason for revenge against the white people. It came to a head in the winter of 1857 when Inkpaduta's band of Sioux went from cabin to cabin and murdered all 40 settlers at Spirit Lake between March 8 and March 13, 1857, except for 4 females who were taken prisoners, and 2 of them were later killed. It was the worst mass murder of innocent people by Indians in Iowa history. One of the females who was taken prisoner was 13-year-old Abby Gardner. She had witnessed her whole family killed. On the first night of the massacre, the Indians celebrated by doing the Sioux scalp dance. After the killings, they took their hostages into Minnesota, where they killed settlers at Springdale. They were now being chased by settlers and soldiers who were ill-equipped for the harsh weather, with many of them also dying. More soldiers joined the chase in South Dakota, ending up near Redfield. There, 3 Dakota Indians bartered with Inkpaduta for Abby and took her back to the Minnesota governor in St. Paul, who paid the ransom money. Mrs. Marble had earlier been rescued by 2 Christian Dakota Indians. Abby went to join her sister Eliza at Hampton, Iowa. Eliza had escaped the Springdale killings. Soon afterwards, Abby married Casville Sharp. They returned to Okoboji, only to find the family cabin occupied by a Methodist minister who refused to give it back. Abby Gardner Sharp was bedridden many years with depression, but in 1885, at age 41, she managed to write a book about the massacre. With the profits from the book, she returned to buy the cabin. She turned the cabin into a museum and greeted visitors for the next 30 years and told her story. The Spirit Lake Massacre put fear into people in that area of the state. Near Carpenter, a fort was built, so if people heard that the Indians were coming, settlers could go there to be safe. It is called Fort Severson, and a few years ago it was restored. Why are they called Euro-Americans? Because very few came directly to Iowa from their native country. Many were even born in America. Remember, it was about 160 years from the time the Mayflower arrived at Plymouth before any white man settled in Iowa. Most families came from the east, where they may have lived for a period of time, moved west, and settled in Wisconsin, Ohio, or Illinois for a few years before they decided to move to Iowa, where they stayed. They came by covered wagon. They came by hand carts, as the Mormons, who were only passing through Iowa. They also came by steamboat, usually from St. Louis on the east, or Kansas City or St. Joseph on the west. People came to settle in Iowa for various reasons. Some came because their government sent them to explore the area and to build an empire for their country, such as the explorers from France and Canada. Others came to gain religious freedom or due to an intolerable government or economic conditions in their homeland, also to escape imprisonment, or they were simply adventurous. Whatever the reason, they found Iowa to be a place of great beauty with fertile land. This is the scene that greeted many upon their arrival. There were many challenges. For example, they had to break the sod. They had houses to build. Sometimes they built log houses. Or out on the prairie in the west, where trees were scarce, they built sod houses. Women's work was never done. They had to spin thread. Then they would weave it into cloth, besides cooking, cleaning, washing, tending children, and helping husbands outside. For some, the challenge was too great, and they either moved or returned back east. But most met the challenge and settled here permanently, adding a wealth of ethnic heritage to the state. The French sent several men for the purpose of exploring the territory of Iowa, claiming it for France. The first Frenchmen to reach Iowa were explorers Father Marquette and Louis Joliet in 1673, where they met some Indians. They only stayed 6 days and then continued down the river on their expedition. They are considered the first white men to see Iowa. 9 years later, another French explorer, La Salle, claimed for France all lands drained by the Mississippi River. He called the area Louisiana in honor of the French king Louis XIV. The French didn't necessarily want to settle there. They wanted to keep other countries out so that they alone could benefit from the profitable fur trading with the Indians. French-Canadian Julien Dubuque was probably the first white man to settle within the present boundaries of the state. He first lived with the Fox tribe, where he won favor with the chief of the Fox Indians, and in September 1788 received a claim of about 150,000 acres of land, extending along the western bank of the Mississippi and including the site of the present city of Dubuque. This is thought to be the first conveyance by Indians of Iowa land to whites. Dubuque had explored the area and determined he could make a profit mining lead, so he hired the Indian women and old men of the Fox tribe to work in the mines. He also brought 10 Canadians from Prairie du Chien to help direct the operations. Dubuque was very industrious. Besides mining, he had land cleared and fenced for farming, built houses, a small mill, and a smelting furnace. He exchanged goods with the Indians for furs he sold in his store. Twice a year he sent boats loaded with furs, hides, and ore to St. Louis to sell, then bought goods and supplies to stock his store. In St. Louis, he was known as one of the largest traders along the upper Mississippi River, and his headquarters known as the Mines of Spain. Dubuque lived and worked among the Indians for 22 years until his death in 1810. After Dubuque died, the Indians ousted the whites, took possessions of the mines, and sporadically worked them for the next 20 years. This picture shows Dubuque with possibly his Indian wife. A completely different endeavor occurred in 1848 when French politician, journalist, and author Etienne Cabet brought the Icarians, a group of French people involved in his utopian socialist movement, to the United States. He established a series of communes in Iowa, Illinois, California, Missouri, and Texas. All except Iowa failed, with many returning to France. In 1852, the Iowa Commune purchased land in Adams County, south of Corning in southwest Iowa. They thrived during the Civil War by selling food and were able to pay off their collective debt by 1870. In the 1870s, the Icarians split over giving women the right to vote, with the losing Icarians moving 8 houses to the southeast part of the community. Bankruptcy forced the other faction to disband in 1878. When the remaining Corning Icarian colony disbanded voluntarily in 1898, it was the longest non-religious communal living experiment in American history. The Icarian settlement is being rebuilt south of Corning, Iowa, as a living history museum. The first Norwegians to settle in Iowa came up from Missouri about 1840. They, along with their leaders Hans Barlian and William Tesman, had left Norway due to political and economic conditions. Young men, having grown up on farms, had no chance of farming if they weren't the first son, as only 4% of the land in Norway was tillable. They settled at Sugar Creek in Lee County near Keokuk. The next groups that came settled in the northeast corner of Iowa, where the land was better suited to farming and the terrain reminded them of Norway. Other Norwegians settled in central Iowa, near Fairview, where the land was flat and the soil rich. Decorah in northeast Iowa became the Norwegian Cultural Center. They founded Luther College in 1861 to train ministers, and today is a top-rated liberal arts college affiliated with the Lutheran Church. The college started collecting historic materials in 1877, documenting the immigrant's story, which led to the formation of the Vesterheim Museum. The Vesterheim is not just a run-of-the-mill museum. It is the National Norwegian American Museum and Heritage Center, having the most extensive collection of Norwegian American artifacts in the world, such as this bentwood box or tine that comes in many sizes to store things from jewelry to potatoes. The museum contains over 30,000 artifacts, 12 historic buildings, and a folk art school. Rosemaling is the traditional Norwegian decorative style of painting flowers and colorful designs on wooden objects such as this trunk. You can experience Norwegian culture by attending the annual Nordic Fest, which is the last full weekend in July. Musical groups perform, and you can see the Nordic dancers and many dressed in traditional costumes. Vendors sell traditional Norwegian food such as pickled or smoked fish, lutefisk, lefse, flatbread, and the delicious romagrat pudding. You can also see Norwegian crafts such as this tapestry, folk art demonstrations, a big parade, and fireworks.
Burlington was the port of entry for Swedish immigrants, and as a result, a goodly number settled there. Most Swedes were sturdy, strong people from rural Sweden who desired to find good farmland. Others left due to high church taxes. The Swedes tended to settle in small groups throughout the state. The first permanent Swedish settlement, led by Peter Cassell, was the Cassell Colony, located in New Sweden in Jefferson County in southeast Iowa in 1845. A year later, a group settled in central Iowa at Swede Point, later called Madrid, located in Boone County. The small wooden red dollar horse has become a symbol of Sweden. It originated in the Swedish province of Dalarna as early as the 16th century. They were originally unpainted toy horses for young children, but now can be found decorated in various colors. The Swedes brought us smorgasbord, buffet, where they served an array of traditional foods: pickled herring, Swedish meatballs, lingonberries, crisp bread, pea soup, pancakes, open sandwiches, crayfish, and many desserts. But their typical meal included a basic diet of potatoes, meat or fish, and a hearty sauce. Two of their celebrations are midsummer, where you may see these colorful costumes, and the Feast of St. Lucia. An Englishman, John B. Newhall, came to Iowa in the mid-late 1830s, lived here for several years, and returned to England in 1844 to recruit people to Iowa, telling them, "I have witnessed the great work of civilization in all its stages, from the lone cabin of the frontier settler to a happy and intelligent population of 170,000 souls." Newhall published a guide for prospective immigrants, but the English had heard too many stories of disillusioned immigrants who had returned to England, most from the East, so paid little attention to him. Alice Mann, a printer from Leeds, also encouraged people to immigrate to Iowa. Finally, in 1850, George Shepard led a group to Iowa, settling in Clinton County, where they bought 2,000 acres. They organized the village of Wilton, but the people were shopkeepers and not accustomed to country living, and soon scattered to the surrounding towns. Other groups from England arrived in Clinton County and became successful farmers. The English tend to melt together with the other British and weren't really a distinctive group. There are definitely some things we have taken from their culture, such as English foods we may eat, crumpets, Yorkshire pudding, and beef Wellington. We may not be as elegant as the English, but we do enjoy an afternoon tea and might order bangers and chips in an English-style pub. Many of our sports originated in England: tennis, badminton, cricket, table tennis, croquet, rugby, and football. All these are part of the English culture that we have adopted here in Iowa. The Irish first settled in Iowa in 1843 when Michael Duffy settled in Old Man's Creek. In 1845, the Hanson brothers, Thomas, John, Stephen, and Edward, settled nearby in an area they called Hanson Settlement. Many immigrants came from Ireland in the 1840s due to a series of potato famines, which caused Ireland to lose 1/4 of its population. The majority were attracted to the larger towns along the Mississippi River, plus Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, and Council Bluffs. Many of them worked in the lead mines around Dubuque. About 1870, a large group settled in north-central Iowa in an area they named Emmetsburg after the Irish patriot Robert Emmet. The Irish brought with them their blessings, which were often prayers that used images of nature, showing how God interacts with his people. They brought their ballads, dances, and foods such as corned beef, cabbage, and potatoes. they turned St. Patrick's Day from a religious celebration to one of honoring their homeland by the wearing of the green, parades, and symbols of shamrocks and leprechauns. The Scots were the smallest British group, settling mainly in the Iowa counties of Boone, Tama, and Keokuk. Some came to escape imprisonment, while others came to find a better place for their children. They brought us the bagpipe, Celtic music, Highland dances, and kilts in their clan's tartan pattern. Their foods include haggis, a pudding made from the heart, liver, and tongue of sheep, mixed with onion, oatmeal, suet, and spices, then put in the stomach of a sheep and boiled. Other foods were oatmeal, potatoes, rich vegetable soup, seafood, beef, oat cakes, and shortbread cookies. They celebrate their heritage with the Highland Games, where you will see people in traditional costume, music, games and dances, and of course, ethnic foods. Poor economic conditions, a dislike for William I's leadership, and searching for religious freedom caused many Dutch farmers and craftsmen to leave Holland for the fertile land in south-central Iowa. In 1847, a group of 800 immigrants led by Dominee Hendrik Schulte settled in an area they named Pella in Marion County. The name referred to the Christians of Jerusalem, who had sought religious freedom during the Roman-Jewish War of 70. The Pella immigrants encouraged more Dutch families to come, but available land near Pella was taken. So the next group, under the leadership of Henry Hosper, settled in Orange City in northwestern Iowa. Both groups established a college in their area, Central College of Pella, and Northwestern College in Orange City. Many of the storefronts in downtown Pella have been remodeled to resemble buildings in Holland. Both Pella and Orange City have a tulip festival every spring. Pella, the first weekend in May, and Orange City, the third weekend in May. You will see thousands of tulips blooming, a number of Dutch windmills, and people of all ages dressed in their native costume, the men in black caps or breeches or baggy trousers, and women in black dresses, a lacy white hat, and the traditional wooden shoes. The costumes vary depending on the area. The official street watching with large brooms and brushes precedes the daily parades. You can buy treats of chocolates, cheeses, and Dutch letters, an almond-filled Dutch pastry, and in addition, an authentic Dutch meal. Their typical meal included potatoes, vegetables, and meat cooked in a Dutch oven, fish and soups, and for holidays and social gatherings, they served cookies, brandy-soaked raisins, and coffee.
About 1848, some of the small states in Germany revolted against their rulers. This was led by a group of people known as 48ers, and when they failed, many of them emigrated to the United States. In the 1860s, the Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck forced the states to unite into one single country. In order to accomplish this, he drafted young men into the army, which led many of them, and often their families, to leave Germany for the United States. There were both farmers and city dwellers that came to Iowa, with many settling in Davenport and other communities along the Mississippi River. The Germans loved to have fun and on Sundays would gather in a park to socialize, listen to music, and enjoy a beer. This didn't set very well with the more devout locals, who spent the day in devotions and quiet activities. Two unique religious German groups settled in southeast Iowa because it was isolated, sparsely populated, and it had fertile soil. The Old Order Amish came in 1846, settling in Kelowna, and in 1855, the Amana Society started the first of 7 villages 60 miles away. Both held separatist viewpoints, spoke a German dialect, and dressed in uniformly outdated styles. The Old World Amish of Kelowna are of Swiss ethnic stock, from Switzerland, France, and Germany. There are 5 degrees of conservatism. The most conservative live as if they were 300 years ago, with farming as their main means of livelihood. They use no electricity, telephones, or automobiles. Their means of travel is the horse and buggy. They don't practice a communal type of living like the Amanas, but help one another and provide for their elderly. Quilting is the main social outlet for women. The Amanas practiced a communal way of life until 1932, and in later years established industries that are famous worldwide. Those coming to Amana were inspirationists, a part of the Pietist and spiritualist movement within the Lutheran Church in Germany. They emphasized the development and nurture of inner life via direct mystical contact with God. They have discontinued the strict regulations of dress and lifestyle, but continue a simple form of worship in unadorned meeting houses. Many Iowa communities celebrate their German heritage. The Amana colonies celebrate 2 German festivals, Maifest and Oktoberfest. In October, you can sample German food and beer and dance a lively polka at an Oktoberfest all across Iowa. Here is a picture of some German dancers. A typical German meal consisted of German potato salad, red cabbage, sauerkraut, sausage, and schnitzel. To learn more, visit the German American Heritage Center located in Davenport. The majority of Czechs came to Iowa in the late 1850s, following a revolt among the peasants in the province of Bohemia. Some came to avoid mandatory military service, others to buy land. They settled in northeast Iowa, in Winneshiek County, around Spillville, in east central Iowa, in Tama, Benton, and Johnson counties, and in Cedar Rapids, where there were jobs in the meat packing plant, the wagon works, and the North Star oatmeal plant. Today, more people of Czech ancestry live in Cedar Rapids than any city in the world except for Prague. The National Czech and Slovak Museum is located there, with displays and artifacts about their immigration. Czech Village celebrates Hobby Days in May. Hobby means mushroom, a staple in Czech diets. You will see maypole dancing, a parade, accordion music, a folk dance festival, and can taste their famous food, the kolache, at the celebration. The kolache consists of poppy seed, prune, custard, and apricot. The economic conditions were typically good in Denmark, so few Danes left until after Denmark lost a war with Germany in 1863. and the territory of Schleswig-Holstein came under German control. Rather than live under German rule, some Danes emigrated to the United States, with the first ones arriving in Iowa during the 1870s. Many of them settled in west central Iowa, in Shelby and Audubon counties, where farmland was available. Today, Elkhorn and Kimbolton are the two largest rural Danish settlements in the United States. In 1976, the Danish villages purchased an authentic operating Danish windmill from Sneed, Denmark. They had it dismantled, shipped, and reconstructed in Iowa. There were also Danish settlements in Grundy and Emmett counties and in Cedar Falls, which was known for publishing the Danevirke, a Danish language newspaper. The Danish villages celebrate Tivoli Fest each Memorial Day weekend and Julefest the weekend after Thanksgiving. This magical festival provides a way to celebrate all things Danish, such as food and tasty treats, including pastries, æbleskewer, wine, and gløgg. You can also shop for some of the famous blue and white porcelain items made in Denmark. And you may even see Father Christmas walking down the street. Throughout the ensuing years, Iowa has become home to many other ethnic groups from all over the world. Each brings a part of their country's culture and heritage with them to Iowa, thereby enriching the lives of all.